between Pootie and Rippy, I was pretty much spending all my available time in the afternoon listening to various dispatch calls and reposting them to my blog. And I'm determined to listen to everything they post. And both of them post more than I do when I'm doing my own posting. They like cover everything. I'm very particular about what I put up. Anyway, I got done finally. It's fucking 9 o'clock East Coast time. And we have a little bit of time to, what do we got here? We have a Dougie Town Hall. This one might be interesting because it's about Black history, and I'm very interested in that particular topic.
To understand the good and the many, many good things that go on in our history and our humanity. But also we have to be strong enough to talk about the things that went bad and the things that were wrong in Oregon
Dougie.
and beyond. Every country has their own biases and problems. It's not like the U.S. or Oregon's the only person. Everybody has it. I have it in Canada, where I came from.
Of course you do.
But we have some special healing to do, some special reconciling to do together. And today is part of that.
Yeah, and that's going wonderfully under His Highness, the King Donald I. It's the reconciliation is going wonderfully. Yes, it is. Thank you, Dougie, for your wonderful observations.
So we need to have the courage to talk about it. Not that we have all the answers, but we have to acknowledge we have a problem first and have the strength to have the problem, to be willing to invest in the needed change and the investment of change, the investment in these conversations. So history is a part of it. So we don't repeat history. I know that sounds repetitive and overused sometimes, but boy, is it true here. And there is some unique history in this state that does need to be at the forefront. So we're investing a lot of time here in town halls and other meetings and in cultural bias training and other things that are coming down the pipe to acknowledge what Trimet's role in this as we heal and deal with these things that ourselves and maybe that we don't even realize. And so part of next year is I'm committing, we're going to do
Your role is nothing in this, Dougie. Okay, your role is to provide good public transportation to everybody. That's your role. All right? Why can't you do that? Why are you distracted by all of this stuff? I mean, it's good to know, but I mean, you're a transportation agency. We should be hearing about transportation.
Review, an outside survey on cultural bias inside our organization. We're going to go back and look at our own policies, not just from a policy perspective, but also from a community of color perspective. Maybe we haven't picked the lens up right. So we have to be willing to understand where we are and maybe try and chart adaptations where they're needed inside Trimet. This is inside baseball that we own. I can't manage all the elements of society, and neither can you. But it starts with us as a person. It starts with us as a group. And yes, it starts with us as a company too. So we are going to continue to invest heavy in this conversation. And today I'm really quite excited. So, and I was just saying before we came on live with Margaret Carter, I'm so delighted she's been able to help me personally. Former Oregon State Senator Margaret Carter. I think some of you will remember her from our June 8th town hall on bias with Edie Mondane, who was just a great twosome. You guys were very impressive. So I want to thank Senator Margaret Carter for helping us continue this conversation, this journey of change. I also want to welcome Zachary Stocks, who's the Executive Director of Oregon Black Pioneers here today, to present what we call a brief history of Blacks in early Oregon. Again, this goes back to the 1800s, so it's not so far away. I remember being a basketball player on scholarship in one of the other states many years ago and going into a washroom at a gas station, and there was a door, it blew me away, and this is as a Canadian, where it talked about whites and blacks, where you enter from separate doors. I couldn't even understand it. It just blew my mind. But it was real in my generation. And so we have to talk about these truths that are historic and not so long ago, but also happening today. When we turn on CNN, MSNBC, and other things, we have got to shape and be part of the change and live the change that we actually want to be. So we know there'll be lots of ideas, hopefully, that come along, and hopefully lots of questions that people have to help us through this. So Zachary is going to give us an overview of Oregon that African Americans arrived to around the years from 1800 to 1920. It was clearly characterized by legal exclusions, discrimination, violence, and so much more. It's not that I mean, particularly in the words I said. I'll give you an example. My own family in Canada during World War II, my dad's first language was not English. It was actually Japanese.
What?
Because my family hid the Japanese from being interned in our logging camps that our company, our family had, to help them so they weren't interned. So bias is systemic.
Japanese?
In it, but today we're going to focus on the black experience, the painful black experience. But it goes beyond, and we're going to continue discussions for all communities of color, so that white people, white males like me, and you and others out there have got to face our truth, and that's part of the conversation today. So, with that, Zachary, I want to welcome you. Thanks for helping us, and over to you for a brief history of blacks in early Oregon.
Well, thank you, Doug. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
And I'm going to do the best thing of the day. I'm going to mute so no one has to listen to me anymore. So over to you, Zach.
Okay. All right. And great. Okay. Hopefully you all can see my screen here with my slides. Okay. I'm seeing a thumbs up from Doug. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, the conversation today is called A Brief History of Blacks in Early Oregon. Can everyone hear me? Okay, audio? Okay, this is better? I saw some chats come up about quiet, so I'll do my best to keep it up a bit. The way that I'm structuring this conversation today is some common questions that we've been hearing a lot lately. I'm going to give you some of the historical context to hopefully try to investigate what the answers to those questions might be. Now, just like Doug said at the top, I certainly don't know all the answers, but we can provide some of the historical context to help us start to investigate these things further. So let's begin here. First, I want to acknowledge that Oregon itself is an idea that was invented by Westerners to try to neatly define a geographic area specifically for the purposes of material exploitation. What we talk about when we call a place Oregon today really encompasses the ancestral homelands of many diverse indigenous nations who've lived here since time immemorial and still do. And settler colonialism has caused tremendous loss in these communities. And though African Americans and Native Americans share a common history of being targets of white supremacy and resisting white supremacy, our organization recognizes that our ancestors, Black Americans, too, have participated in the violent displacement of Native peoples. And so we as an organization are committed to learning more and doing a better job to talk.
So Black Americans also participated in genocide of Native Americans. That's interesting. That's the first time I've heard that.
About that history. So when I'm giving my talk today, please recognize that while I talk about the peopling of Oregon, that Oregon was a place where people have lived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they have
like
rich cultural traditions that already existed before any non-Indigenous people ever came there. And briefly talking about Oregon Black Pioneers. Oregon Black Pioneers is Oregon's only African-American historical society with a statewide mission. We've been around since 1993, and we illuminate the seldom told histories of people of African descent in Oregon. And we do this through our original exhibitions, our publications. We have historical research that we conduct. We have projects that we engage in with statewide partners to commemorate sites with African-American historical significance. And we take part in public programs like this one today. And we get support from viewers like you. So if you're so inclined, please do visit our website, learn more about who we are and what we do. And please, if you can, consider making a donation to help us continue to do this work. So we're a historical society. How did we get here to where we see scenes like this every single day in Portland, in Eugene, other places in Oregon, and all around the country? And what does our organization, a historical society, have to do in sharing, the answer to this question? How did we get here, right? Well, first, I think I'll start by answering that second part, which is to say that I think we all have a responsibility of trying to understand what is going on in our society particularly when it comes to social problems, and specifically in the aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. We've been hearing an outpouring from our audiences trying to get some clarity about what are the circumstances that created such a prominent response in Oregon, a place where the African-American population is just 2.2%. So in one of the whitest states in America, why has there been this tremendous racial reckoning, or rather a reckoning with racial injustice here, of all places? And as I said, I don't know all the answers, but as a historical society, what we can do is try to provide you with some of the background about centuries of struggles around.
Yeah, I read something about that somewhere, how it was interesting that the Black Lives Matter movement was actually the most active place for it was Portland, the whitest city in America. Of course, I think there's a lot of other reasons for that, being a creative culture type city that has a lot of young people who are educated and who have no jobs and basically no hope, and so they're out in the streets. I mean, it's that's been spewing. This whole gentrification of Portland has been brewing for a long time.
Racial injustice that contributed to the social circumstances that have inflamed these continued inequalities, and then the responses that we see from people every night in downtown Portland. So when we're talking about Oregon, what are we talking about? As you see in these three maps here, Oregon has not always been one specific place as it looks like today. And so looking from left to right, you'll see there the Oregon Country, as it was called. That's a distinctly American name for this region. The Canadians refer to it as the Columbia District. The Hudson Bay Company.
We don't see it.
And what that encompassed was basically all of British Columbia, all of present-day Oregon.
Come on, we need to see the visual. Where's the visual?
Portions of Montana and Wyoming. In 1846, we see the development of the Oregon Territory, which stretched from the present Canadian border with the United States and the border with Canada, or excuse me, with California, and then going out again into portions of Montana and Wyoming, and then the present-day states of Oregon, beginning in 1859.
All right. What? What? I don't know. That doesn't make any sense to me. Okay.
I heard someone say that they're not able to see this.
Well, I can see it, but it doesn't make any sense.
Do you have a visual on our maps here?
I mean...
Okay.
Yeah, I can see you, and...
All right, here's 1818 to 1846. What is this? What is this? This is Oregon here? I can't really make that out. I mean, that looks like Puget Sound to me there. And then 1846 to 1859. This looks more like Oregon. Yeah, see? But what's the difference between this and this? I don't see much difference. Do you?
Hear you.
Okay. So the reason I have these maps here is to show you that this is an evolving place with many different social and political changes taking place that have changed the demographics of this region. So a quick history lesson for you. In the year 1792, there was an American ship captain by the name of Robert Gray. He sailed from Boston in a ship called the Columbia Rediviva. And after going around Cape Horn and coming to the Pacific Northwest in search of sea otter pelts to then take to China, he happened to stumble through a bay, which turned out to be a river. And he named that river after his boat, Columbia. And he became the first non-native person to ever enter the Columbia River, and the first ship to cross the Columbia River bar. And by doing that, according to the Doctrine of Discovery, which is a series of papal bulls that began in the 1400s, he was able to lay claim to the entire Columbia River watershed on behalf of the nation which he represented, in this case, the United States. So we're talking about an area the size of France that now the U.S. has a nominal land claim to. And it was all because he happened to bring his boat in first.
Yeah, I always love that about our history. How when they sail to these places, they declare, "We now own this place." It's like complete lack of believing that there's actual people that are sovereign in the place. That's pretty much been the history of the world, I guess, right?
And so after that, the U.S. had to then try to settle that land to make good on this nominal land claim and to counter competing interests from the Russians and the British and the Spanish, who have been sending ships past this area for probably 30 years at this point, beginning in the early 1770s. So that really led to a rivalry that continued for another 100 years. This really wasn't settled until 1846. That was the period where the present-day border of Washington and British Columbia was established for good at the 49th parallel. And after 1818, the border with Mexico was the present-day border with California in the Treaty of Tordesillas. Now, the reason I give you all this background is just to say Oregon was international before it was national. This was a land that was populated first and foremost by incredibly diverse indigenous peoples, but then we start to see the arrival later of British, Spanish, French, Russians, and then later Americans. And among them, we see Cajuns, we have African Americans, we have people coming from Hawaii. Hawaiians made up a huge portion of early Oregon, and of course Chinese and Japanese folks who came as well to work in some of the earliest industries. So we're talking about a population boom that took part in a short amount of time between 1792 and by 1859 when the state border was made. And so when were black people a part of this story, right? So black people only started coming to Oregon around World War II, right? That's what I've always heard. No, the truth is that as long as there have been non-indigenous people in Oregon, there have been black people in Oregon. And that's a really important thing that we have to talk about. And so some examples I have on the screen here, going all the way back to Sir Francis Drake's arrival at a place called Whale Cove in Tillamook County back in 1578. Drake became the first British sailor to come to the Pacific, where he was raiding Spanish Pacific settlements as a privateer on behalf of Queen Elizabeth I. And among his crew, we know he had 4 black passengers, 2 of whom we know their names. One was Diego, who he had liberated from Panama and who had joined his crew and had been sailing with him for about 2 to 3 years at this point and had gone back to Europe and now is joining him again on this new expedition. The other person whose name we know is Maria, who was a pregnant enslaved woman who was held on a Spanish slave ship, which was intercepted by Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, while they were on the Pacific coast near Mexico. And so when they landed at Whale Cove, those 4 black passengers, the other 2 whose names we don't know, also came from Panama. They spent 2 weeks with the rest of the crew building a settlement as they careened the vessel. And as we believe, if they were indeed in Oregon and not in California, as some historians are suggesting, that would mean that they predate the next known African-American individuals by over 200 years. And again, 1578, we're talking about much earlier than some of the origins of our state history really begins and how we talk about it. That next individual that I mentioned is a fellow named Marcus Lopez. He is from Cape Verde, an island nation off the western coast of Africa. Was settled first by Portuguese, and we believe that Marcus Lopez was a free black person. He was not enslaved, and he came from a family of sailors. He joined the crew of the Lady Washington, which was captained by Robert Gray, the very captain I mentioned, who 4 years later sailed the ship Columbia over the Columbia River Bar. So prior to that expedition, they came out first to the Pacific Northwest in search of pelts, and they landed in Tillamook Bay near Garibaldi and became shipwrecked. Marcus Lopez was then killed while he was on shore by a Tillamook tribal member over a dispute over a sword that he had left on the ground and was then taken. So unfortunately, he has the distinction of being the first black person to be killed, to die in Oregon. And then, of course, there's the well-known person York from 1805 who traveled down the Columbia River Gorge and made it all the way to Astoria and wintered at Fort Clatsop as a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Then, of course, made the return trip back home. York was the only member of the Corps Discovery not to receive any compensation for his participation in the Lewis and Clark expedition, whereas everyone else received not only cash but land. York, as far as we know, remained enslaved, if not for the rest of his entire life, then right up until the end of his life. And then we know
So he got nothing
into
into
regularly
slavery.
part of the ship crews of Spanish and British trade ships in the 1700s, and in the early 1800s we have overland fur trappers who are coming up from Missouri or coming.
Well, anybody that knows anything about history knows black people have been involved in history all the way very back to the Empire of Rome and Greece. There's always been black people everywhere. It's not some new phenomenon. Racism kind of, with the cotton in South of America, that's the plantations. Well, I don't know enough about it to talk about it, so forget it.
Down from Canada, who made their way into what we consider the Oregon country today. And those names we don't know, but if you consider the far reaches in the southeastern portions of what became known as Oregon, individuals like Edward Rose or Peter Rain, James Beckwourth. I mean, there's many of these mountain men figures who became important parts of establishing what later became the Oregon Trail. I mentioned these earliest individuals only to point out to you that when we talk about the father of Oregon, John McLaughlin, in 1824, or the Oregon Trail, which brought so many people from the east to the west, or even Astoria, the oldest county in Oregon and in the entire west that was established by the United States in 1811. All of the people I mentioned here came before all of those things. So when you talk about the history of Oregon, there really has never been a time where black people were not a part of it. In fact, we predate, our presence in Oregon predates many of what we consider the most important moments or figures in the history of Oregon. So that's really interesting. Why haven't we heard a lot about that? Why don't we hear about early blacks in the popular narrative of our state's history?
Why?
Well, probably because there weren't very many of them. Even though these individuals I talked about have important legacies, they mostly acted as individuals. So the black population in Oregon has always been small. It's always been very isolated from states with much larger African-American populations in the South or in the East. And with fewer people here, that of course means there's fewer opportunities to create those really important social institutions within a community, whether they're places for social gathering or if they're black-owned businesses, if they are places for mutual support. Without those things, there's not a lot of incentive to bring people to Oregon or to develop really strong black communities. Okay, but why didn't the state's black population grow proportionately with the state's white population? That's one that we hear all the time. Well, there's an easy answer.
Obvious.
It's racism.
No shit.
Did you think that wasn't going to come up? But in truth, it really is that. So, whoa, why does it have to be about racism all the time? How can it just be racism? Well, I want to point out for you that Oregon passed in its early days 3 exclusion laws, which explicitly made it so that black people could not participate in the full benefits of legal and social protection in Oregon. First was the Territorial Exclusion Law of 1844, and I'll just read for you the highlighted portions here. Section 2, in all cases where slaves shall have been or shall hereafter be brought into Oregon, the owners of such slaves respectively shall have the term of 3 years from the introduction of such slaves to remove them out of the country. In other words, if an enslaved person was brought to Oregon by their owner, the owner did not have to release them from slavery until after 3 years. And we know that many times that was not followed up with. And so there's stories of people who were enslaved for many, many more years beyond what they were legally allowed to be kept as slaves in Oregon. So if people say there was no slavery in Oregon, that's not true. While Oregon itself was never a territory that allowed slavery, it did allow slave owners to keep their enslaved property for a term of at least 3 years. And again, if they shall fail to quit the country, they shall receive upon his or her back not less than 20 or no more than 39 stripes. As in
what a great country we have
that was known as the Lash Law. And it was instituted by a legislator named Peter Burnett, who later became the very first elected governor of the state of California. While there was no one who was actually ever whipped according to this law that we know of, nonetheless, it was included in that early law as a penalty for any blacks who lived here beyond the period when they were legally freed upon being here for more than 3 years.
God bless America, MAGA, 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 MAGA.
It shall not be lawful for any Negro or mulatto to enter into or reside within the limits of this territory. That's as clear as can be. So this particular exclusion law was passed mostly to talk about
no Negro or mulatto shall enter into or reside in the limits of Oregon.
Coming as members of crews on different sailing ships.
Masters of
and the law wanted to make clear that any blacks that thought they could reside in Oregon and leave the company of their ship and decide to settle here, that they would not be allowed to do so. That was something that the early legislators felt would devalue the labor of whites that were already living in Oregon, and they feared that it would encourage further migration of blacks coming on ships to then settle in the coastal regions of Oregon. And then the last one was, unfortunately, in the Oregon Constitution of 1857, and it clearly states, no free Negro or mulatto not residing in the state at the time of adoption of this Constitution shall come, reside, or be within the state, or hold any real estate, or make contracts, or retain any suit therein. And specifically, this outlines the fact that there will be no legal protections for...
You turn them off because you can't. Here, Oregon Constitution, 1857. No free Negro or mulatto not residing in this state at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall come, reside, or be within the state, or hold any real estate, or make any contracts, or maintain any suit therein. And the Legislative Assembly shall provide penal laws for the removal of public officers of all such Negroes and mulattoes, and their effectual exclusion from the state. Just like a Trimet exclusion, you got an Oregon exclusion. And for the punishment of persons who shall bring them into our state, one free white man is worth more than 2 Negro slaves. Jesus Christ, what a fucked up country. In the cultivation of the soil or any other business which can be influences the zeal of the exercise of discretion. Negroes are naturally lazy. Slaves actuated by the fear. Did people actually believe this shit? It's hard to believe that an educated person would actually believe this. I don't care how long ago it is. I mean, I can't believe that people with brains and ethics could believe any of this.
For black people in Oregon, and they are not permitted to come to or to reside in Oregon. They could not bring a legal suit or a challenge against a white defendant, and they would not be able to engage into a contract. And by that, what they really mean is they can't own property. And there's a quote here from George H. Williams. It says, one free white man is worth more than 2 Negro slaves. Negroes are naturally lazy. They're only interested in doing enough to avoid punishment. That is sort of the mindset that was behind a lot of the early lawmakers in Oregon. They believed that this was a territory that in a state that should not have slavery, but they also believed that it should not have black people at all. And interestingly enough, George H. Williams, he later ruled in a famous case called Holmes v. Ford in favor of the black Holmes family that they could be reunited with their children who were still held as slaves by their former owner, Robert Ford. So while the justice here believed that there's no legal basis for someone to hold someone as an enslaved person, he also believed that black people did not have the same standard of protection of the law or deserve the same treatment. So it's an incongruity that doesn't really match up. Well, maybe that's how the politicians felt, but that's not most Oregonians, right? Well, I hate to tell you this, but unfortunately that's not true. This is a voting tally from the 1857 territory vote, which voted on the Constitution to decide whether or not they wanted to become state, and they included two provisions. One, to determine whether or not it would be a slave state, and whether or not free blacks would be allowed to live there. And as you can see, while overwhelmingly there was support for anti-slavery, there was also vehement support against allowing blacks to live in Oregon. Some of these counties are really pretty outrageous. Jackson County and Josephine County, Douglas County, the numbers are really staggering. So these are all the voters in the counties at the time, all of them white men. So clearly they held the same views as the people they elected to represent them in the territorial legislature. But despite this, I think it's really important to recognize that between all these years that happened, people still came. Most of them had no choice in the matter. As I say at the bottom, from 1844 to 1865, we know that there were at least 50 enslaved blacks who were brought to Oregon. Washington State during those same years had just 2. So there was slavery in Oregon. But the enslaved people that came to Oregon then were later had the opportunity to become emancipated, and if they stayed, started to form some of the first black communities and did their best to survive in a place where they were legally had no protections. So when did those racist laws get taken off the books? Well, the exclusion law wasn't repealed until 1926. The 15th Amendment, which gave blacks the right to vote, Oregon didn't ratify that until 1959, even though nationally it was passed. And Oregon didn't ratify the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, until 1973. That was a personal effort of one of the state's first African-American lawmakers, and I'm afraid I don't remember the name of that individual, but 1973. And Oregon was the only state ever admitted into the Union with a racial exclusion law on its books. Okay, so and this really didn't have an impact. I mean, were these things all that significant? They really, really were. And there's one more that I want to talk about which made a significant difference as well, and that's the Donation Land Act. So Oregon's nominated population through the 1830s was very, very small. But the Donation Land Act of 1850 created an opportunity where indigenous land that had been taken from the tribes was then given away for free to white settlers.
America! They killed all the natives. Get out of here, you fucking natives. Get in your reservation or we'll shoot you and put you in a ditch. And they gave 320 acres to any white male citizen, 640 acres for married couples who files an Oregon land claim. Yep. Well, that's how it worked in this country, man. They stole it from one people and gave it to the other, and the rest is history, and I just want to have a fucking drink.
If you were a white male, you were entitled to 320 acres for free. All you had to do was come to Oregon, settle the claim, and settle the property for at least 14 months, and then it was yours free and clear. If you were married, that could be up to 640 acres. But this was not a law that was black people were not eligible
of course not.
To file a claim via the Donation Land Act. So that's really important. We think
or
about
Jews, how
about
about Chinese and Japanese?
Boom in population in Oregon. And so you might wonder, well, why weren't there more black people who came out?
Yes, only white Christians.
This is the reason why. The Donation Land Act and their exclusions from participating in that act. Because if you were a free black person at a time pre-Civil War, right, you already have few legal protections no matter where you live. And it's incredibly expensive to travel all the way to Oregon. And what would your incentive be to come here, knowing that there are laws on the books that say you can't be here, so you would have to come covertly and try to survive without anyone knowing about it and hope that none of your neighbors reported you, lest you be excluded from the state legally. And then upon arrival, you have to probably squat for land or rent from someone who might be sympathetic to your cause. Because you have no opportunity to purchase land or to be given the free land that was given to other people. So something that doesn't get talked about too often, but the Donation Land Act is really a crucial part of why the black population of Oregon never grew proportionally to the white population in Oregon. Well, thankfully, Oregon wasn't a violent place for the black people that did come here, right? Well, not so much. In 1841, there's a man named James Sauls. He was a sailor and a bar pilot. He was publicly flogged and run out of Astoria for an unknown offense. After that, he moved to Oregon City, where he became actually a central figure in an incident called the Cockstock Affair, which was a dispute between another black sailor, former sailor, and a Wasco tribal member, and it led to violence.
Where's the next slide?
In the aftermath of that, a lot of people blamed James Sauls.
Damn it.
And they alleged that he was conspiring with the Clackamas tribe to try and destroy property of his neighbors without any evidence. They suggested this.
Come on,
And
hurry up.
while he was grandfathered in, he couldn't be.
Stop. Okay, we're going to have to do the same thing that we do at the board meeting. We have to stop these people and read it ourselves. Well, at least Oregon wasn't a violent place for black people that did come. And he laughs about that. 1841, James Sauls, a sailor and bar pilot, was publicly flogged and run out of Astoria for an unknown offense. Yeah, the offense was being black. 1851, Jacob Vanderpool, owner of an Oregon City boarding house, was ordered to leave Oregon when a competitor cited him for the violation of the state's exclusion laws. So this guy, Jacob Vanderpool, was a black man that owned a boarding house. 1902, Alonzo Tucker, a boxer and gym owner. Oh, great, was lynched. They lynched him for assaulting a white woman. And America, mega! Only known lynching of a black person in Oregon. I'm sure there's more that we don't know about. George Burr, a janitor, was kidnapped from Medford, taken to a remote location and beaten, driven to the California side of the border, and threatened never to return. Timothy Pettis is murdered and castrated in. Don't you love this country? In 1923, Oregon had 43,000 card-carrying members of the KKK, including Governor Walter Pierce. And now you know why we have these Proud Boy people and all of them racist, because it's part of the history.
Expelled from Oregon because he already lived here. He was expelled from the Willamette Valley, and so they sent him out of the valley, and he returned to Oregon.
Kill them all.
In 1851, Jacob Vanderpool was an owner of a boarding house and a saloon in Oregon City.
Kill them all.
And
Kill them all.
he
Kill them
was
all.
ordered to leave
Kill them
Oregon when
all.
a competitor cited his business and said that he can't be here because he's black. And so he's the only person that we know of who was actually expelled from the state because of its black exclusion laws. We believe he went to California after that, but no idea what his life was like beyond that. In 1902, the only known lynching of a black person in Oregon that we know of took place. It was in Marshfield, which is Coos Bay today. Alonzo Tucker, he was a sailor, he was a boxer and a gym owner, and he was lynched after allegedly assaulting a white woman. I should mention as well, though, that there were lynchings of Native Americans in Oregon. So while Tucker was the only known black lynching victim, there were other lynching victims in Oregon.
Yeah, it's great,
in 1921, there was a janitor named George Burr. He was kidnapped from Medford and taken over the California border, and he was threatened and beaten and told never to come back. There were also some examples of mock lynchings that took place where people would put nooses around people's neck and beat them up and hang them over a tree, but not actually follow through with killing them as a means of trying to threaten them and encourage them to leave on their own. One of those happened in Oregon City as well. And then in 1924, Timothy Pettis was murdered and castrated in Coos Bay by an unknown assailant. And then there are other instances that were taking place by the Ku Klux Klan. In Eugene, they had an incredibly strong presence for a long time, burned crosses on the university campus outside of where one of its first black employees worked.
Yeah.
In 1923, there were 43,000 card-carrying members of the KKK. That's 5% of the state's population. So 1 out of every 20 Oregonians was a member of the KKK. And that includes the governor, Walter Pierce. Pretty staggering. So then what would bring blacks here in the first place? Why would anyone want to come here knowing all of these circumstances that we just talked about? Well, with very few exceptions, most of the black people that came here came as enslaved individuals. Just like I mentioned, there were at least at least 50 enslaved peoples brought to Oregon. And then we start to later see the arrival of free blacks who came here first by ship and then as overland travelers as well, seeking opportunities that perhaps they couldn't find in other states.
Yeah.
And what did they do when they got here? They started to work in all the industries that became the important industries of Oregon. Loggers, fishermen, sailors, gold miners, ranchers, you name it. You could find blacks working in every region in Oregon. We have evidence of all of these things. And their presence was ubiquitous in any logging camp, among any sort of maritime communities, in the coal mines in southern Oregon. So blacks came and they participated in the economies and the early industries that shaped what became the cultural traditions of Oregon's heritage. So black people have always been a deeply rooted part of the Oregon story. They were never, while they may have been politically marginalized, they were never marginalized from the industries that built up our early economy. In fact, their labor was dependent on for that. So I mentioned segregation and discrimination. Let's talk more about that. So one prominent example I have here, in Coos Bay again, Marshfield, the school district superintendent in 1903, Franklin Golden, he said this over the 4 children of the Challenger family, 4 black children. On account of the physical condition of said Negro children and their lack of cleanliness, their presence in the classes will materially retard the progress of the 330 white children now in attendance. So the thought of having 4 black children in the Marshfield school was, in their mind, completely damaging to the educational opportunities of the 330 white children that were there. And because of that, they created a separate, segregated school to educate just 4 children, all from one family. Another example I have here is Taylor v. Cone in 1904. Oliver Taylor was a black man who purchased 5 box seat tickets at a Portland theater to see a minstrel show. It's interesting. And when he got there, he tried to redeem his tickets, but found that the theater owner did not actually want to seat them in box seats after all. So they refused to honor his purchase, and he refused to take a seat in the balcony. And so he sued the theater owner, and he lost the case in Multnomah County, but he won on appeal in Oregon Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court. Some other examples, this is a great one. The Beaver Hill Mine, it's in Coos County near Copium. In 1894, there were about 36 black miners who were brought all the way from West Virginia to work in the Beaver Hill mines, most likely as strike breakers. They came on the promise of $5 a day, but when they got there, they found that the pay was actually just 90 cents a day. But they traveled all this way. They lied to bring themselves and their families all the way here.
America, they lied.
And so for the next 3 to 4 years, they stayed and worked in the Beaver Hill mine. In this community of about 200 black people living there at a time when there were less than 1,000 blacks in the entire state. But in 1896, they were all fired en masse, allegedly for planning a strike. And so the community raised funds to help them pay for their return trip back to West Virginia. And then in Portland, of course, we found that there's evidence of discriminatory housing covenants, lending programs, and zoning laws that restricted blacks from living anywhere outside of Lower Albina neighborhood between 1910, 1940s, and even later into the 1970s. There's plenty of evidence of that. Is my connection okay? I've got some notices. It's good? Okay. All right. So were any blacks in Oregon able to come here and do well for themselves?
Let's watch a little more.
Yes. Yes. Many, many were. In fact, most of them did. After they were no longer enslaved, we start to see that the blacks that were here were incredibly industrious. And, of course, the ones that came here as free persons, just like we see in contemporary immigration from other countries to the United States, the people that have the means to travel such great distances tend to be the ones that are already the most prepared to be successful upon arrival. And that's what we see from the African Americans who made their way here. So some examples for you. Up top is some photos from Maxville. Maxville was an integrated logging community in Wallowa County at the very far northeast portion of the state. between the 1910s and 1930s. The loggers were brought from the South to come and work for the Maxville Company. So they built this logging camp that was incredibly remote and isolated. They had no opportunities to really discriminate against each other because they needed each other to survive. And so while there was some nominal segregation in Maxville, in reality, we see much more examples of where people spent their time together, like as we see in the pictures here, which I think are just really delightful. I love that picture in the upper left. Down at the bottom are some photos from Union Station in Portland. So the Southern Pacific, Northern Pacific, and Union Pacific Railroads all were the largest employers of African Americans in Oregon between the 1850s and 1930s. And that's not just people working on the trains themselves, but also people who worked in the affiliated industries around the railroad. So if you worked in the hotels that catered to people who traveled on the railroads, most of their wait staff, most of their cooks would have been black, porters on the train, as well as the waiters and cooks on the train would have been black, maids, barbers. Black people were ubiquitous in and around the railroad industry. And this is at a time when Portland's black community was actually concentrated near Union Station. Most African Americans lived downtown prior to the development of some of the earliest, what we consider, black Portland in North and Northeast Portland. Originally, it was downtown. And then, of course, we see that community gathering took place through the church, which is a story that we find everywhere where black people have been in the United States. So the three largest black congregations then and now are Mount Olivet Baptist, Vancouver Ave Baptist, and the Mount Zion AME. Between the 1890s and 1920s, these three churches were established, and they continue to have large congregations today. They have always been sites of great social and also political organizing and have been important parts of developing black communities in our state. At the bottom, I have some examples of military history when it comes to African Americans. On the left is a shot of the Buffalo Soldiers when they were stationed at the Vancouver Barracks in Vancouver, Washington. So while that's in Washington State, nonetheless, most of the work that they would do was in Portland. They helped to develop some roads, and they participated in goodwill ambassadorship events, 4th of July parades, etc., between 1899 and 1900. And then on the right is Moses Stevens. He's a Medal of Honor winner and a Buffalo Soldier himself. He worked at Fort Stevens, which today is a state park in Clatsop County near Warrenton. I actually was just there this morning. And from 1895 until 1898, he was the only soldier at Fort Stevens. He was brought there from North Dakota to work as an ordnance sergeant, and his job was to oversee the precursor to the Army Corps of Engineers as they developed some of the first professional batteries at Fort Stevens to replace the earthwork structures that had been built during the Civil War. So it must have been a pretty lonely experience, but I like to think, for 4 years, he was the only person there. They entrusted this entire operation to him. And then, of course, some really important women in the history of politics in Oregon. Beatrice Morrow Kennedy up top. She's the first black woman to practice law in Oregon, and she was also the owner and editor of the largest black newspaper in Oregon for a time, The Advocate. So in the 1910s, she was perhaps the most well-known black woman in Oregon. She gave tons of lectures, especially lectures to students, and she used her law experience.
All right, well, I'm going to wrap up this particular segment. This is basically a history lesson here, and I would suggest you go to Samantha Elmore right there, to view this video, because it's not Trimet related. It's a history lesson, and it's good history. And I'm going to watch this on my own time. I'm not going to comment on it because it's not really Trimet related. It's just black history. So I'm going to watch this on my own time right from her website. And that will do it for me. Over and out.